the 8th, but I will be participating online for the CE performance review workshops over that time.
Sure. Okay. I move that the apology from Councillor Ferguson and the requests for leave of absence be approved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Esther. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Any declarations of conflict of interest? None. Moving on. There are no matters lying on the table. Special announcements. Just want to acknowledge the recent death of Dave Black, former Deputy Harbour Master. Dave Black was a well-known long-time local who held the role of Deputy Harbour Master for many years. Dave had a passion for his role, working with the community, and is remembered for his fondness for boating and helping out anyone that needed it. Anyone that worked with Dave knew they could rely on him and always gained from his experience and knowledge that he shared openly. Public forum, we have 3 today, and first up is Pierre.
Today, we're going to talk about money. Leading economists believe on average that we need to invest between 2 and 3% of global GDP per year to reach net zero by 2050. We are a very long way from that level of investments. The latest IPCC synthesis report shows that global investments need to be 3 to 6 times higher than they are at the moment. Economists not only agree that we need to invest a lot more, but also that the financial cost of inaction will be far greater than the required investments. And we can already see this today right here in New Zealand. For a start, we're in a recession caused by the aftermath of Cyclone Gabrielle. On top of the recession, the cost of climate damages are exploding. For example, the New Zealand Treasury estimated in 2018 that climate events were costing the country $94 million per year. This year alone, the floods will cost us at least $13.5 billion. We can see the same acceleration by looking at insurance numbers. This year, insurance companies have already received 107,000 climate-related claims for an estimated cost of $3.18 billion, 10 times more than the previous record. This is not just macroeconomics. It does affect us all as individuals on a daily basis. By February, the cost of house insurances had already increased 17% year over year. Then, of course, there are food prices. After many farms were impacted by bad weather this year, the cost of fruits and veggies are up 22% on average. As the climate will keep worsening for the foreseeable future, it would be naive to believe that food will become cheap again. Ongoing climate disasters do not only destroy harvests and homes. Floods this year have damaged hundreds of kilometers of road and infrastructure. Just like for food, it would be naive to believe that infrastructure will become more affordable in the future. Even the central government just admitted that there isn't enough tax revenues to pay for climate destruction. In the last annual plan, even with a 14.2% increase in rates, the council was unable to pay for 47 infrastructure projects. So here is our question. Do you have a plan? Do you have a plan to afford the infrastructure we need in the coming years? And do you have a plan to halve our emissions in 6 years? We do have a plan. A large passenger tax at the airport will solve both these challenges for our districts. We thank the councillors who already answered our email asking you to take a stance on our proposal. And if you haven't done so already, please let the community know your position. Answering our mail is also an opportunity for you to let the community know what your plan is to solve both our emissions and our financial problems. Thank you.
Next up, Florence.
No wanaka aho, ko Florence to Queengoa. I am here to ask the council to create a new regenerative land zoning that encourages landowners to protect, regenerate, and possibly share the land they are guardians of, kaitiaki. For context, in Wanaka, urban growth is transforming the small town we love, pushing nature further and further away, decreasing inhabitants' well-being, tourism appeal, and wildlife. The opposite of what we want to create. QLDC's principles are community resilience, connection and well-being, bird chorus, zero carbon, and pride in sharing. For years, the community has been asking for a limit to growth, but the current rules still foster suburbia. There is a missing piece of legislation to respond to all three crises of climate, biodiversity, and cost of living. A regenerative land zoning enables low carbon living by connected pathways for commuting and recreation, 30% for nature by 2030, local food production. Regenerative land zoning is a new voluntary land zoning allowing landowners to secure their land for perpetuity or 100 years, providing they enhance nature and or the community. The land can be sold with the same condition. The owners can choose how they want to regenerate. For example, planting trees, native or not, restoring or creating wetlands, growing orchards for local food, and so on. And the owners can choose how they share it. For example, a strip along the road can be made into bike lanes. A land can be gardened by community groups or plots. It already happens. This public-private partnership would protect what we already have and deploy it to create a network of green parks and corridors. So how to do it? I have shared the idea for 2 years. I've talked with many council staff and they all see the point, but they don't have the power. The Local Government Rating Act 202 states clearly that remissions and postponement can be on any property to any extent and for any reason. Therefore, I believe a regenerative land zoning could be created if there is a political will. The council is the entity capable of creating a new land zoning. So I invite you to come over the hill and visit our place as an example of what can be achieved. I want to make sure you understand what's on offer for the public here. And yes, as Michel Morse said, it is innovative but untested. So let's be innovative and test it. So my question to you is, will you support and come to the table to start the process? Thank you.
Last, we have a written statement that we read out by Jane from the Hawea Community Association regarding its item 6, Hawea South Agenda.
Item 6 on your agenda for Thursday's full council meeting indicates that you would like to add Hawea South to the planned variation for intensification. As the acting chair of the HCA, it is my duty to point out to you that the community has just gone through a very lengthy deviation process to establish an outcome that will meet the needs of the community for the next 50 years, 20 more than your spatial planning. Within this zoning agreement is carefully thought out roading, local population services and infrastructure, cycleways, connectivity of streets to the lake, the waterways, the domain, the river and Hawea Flat. This was a compromise position for us in a bid to secure a commercial town services area and green spaces that meet the needs and aspirations of our community. In exchange for support on the zoning, we negotiated a bigger commercial area to cater for the growing population and to provide local services. This will help prevent unnecessary car journeys to Wanaka for basic services, entertainment and some work opportunities. Connected cycle and walkways to establish alternative transport around the area in line with climate aspirations. A town or market square in which council wants to keep at 2,500 metres square, but we think it should be bigger. Agreed triggers for road developments to occur, restrictions on resource consents, so they cannot be issued without available wastewater capacity. This will limit development for some time. Medium density zoning between Longview development and the proposed possible primary school site protected for 7 years. Whilst we tried to add drinking water to the consent requirement, we were advised that it needed to be resolved at a local level, i.e. by the council. The medium density zoning already provides options for housing and clarity about where it will be based. The use of our green spaces is something we would like to discuss with council, given the proximity of the domain and the development plans for this piece of land by the domain board. Again, this was indicated by the Environment Court as a topic that needed to be settled at local government level. So please let us know when you're available to catch up. After these hard-won wins, it feels completely disrespectful to the Hawea community to even consider adding the Hawea South land to the intensification plan change variation without full and robust public consultation first. If this is notified, the 4 to 5 weeks typically provided to make submissions will not give the HCA adequate time to consult with the community and provide a report, not to mention the untold volunteer hours it would take to achieve this. The HCA supported the zoning of land for development in exchange for safeguarding a town centre and ensuring that we have provided space for enough housing to support the growing population over the next 50 years. This is without intensification, one of the core reasons people move out to Hawea to gain some space. And I'm at 3 months.
Thank you, Jane. Right, and you'll be able to circulate that. Councillors.
Yes.
Okay.
We've all got it.
You've all got it already? Confirmation of the agenda, that the agenda be confirmed without addition or alteration. Seconder.
Just a question. Page 14. It's just a small thing. I just, you got it. The community board.
We'll get there, Lyle. We'll get to the minutes. We're just discussing the agenda. At this
Okay,
point.
I've got it again. I've done it again. Sorry.
But thank you for the warning.
It's okay.
I'm looking for a
Thanks.
seconder for the agenda. Thank you, Mel.
Slow, man.
All those in favour? Motion carried. Confirmation of the minutes. Councillor Cox.
Page 15, I think it is. Yeah, just the thing about the Upper Perth Community Board. All the others have the motion of who moved and seconded. I don't know why we haven't got it for the community board one, whether it's important or not.
No, because it's the CE report, so the decision has been made. That's included in the community board decision making, and the CE's one is just a confirmation of that decision. It's not the decision again.
Oh. Okay, very good. Thanks for educating.
So, Mickey, did you? No, my
No
notes.
questions. No, yeah, I just raised a query about the content of the depth of the comments, but James replied to me, so it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Right, I move that the minutes of the public part of the ordinary meeting of the Queenstown Lakes District Council held on the 29th of June 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Barry. All those in favour?
Aye.
Motion carried. Item 1, Queenstown Lakes District Joint Housing Action Plan endorsement, page 21 of your papers. We have Anita and Michelle. Page 19. 21 on my notes. 29. Oh, over to you, Anita.
Well, great, thank you. First of all, I'd like to start off by just saying thank you to all our partners who've been involved in the development of this joint housing action plan. It's been a real combined effort, particularly from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Kāinga Ora, the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, internally our planning policy team, community partnership team, and policy and strategic growth. So it's been a real group effort to pull this together. We went out for community feedback and we've listened and made some amendments and changes, in particular regarding tiny homes, rent to build, and just adding in some more around legislation and levers. So I think there's a lot of room to move in that space, and particularly to work quite closely with our partners on that. We have a range of measures that are already underway. So we have the structure planning, the Tiputahi and the Southern Corridor structure plan has begun, and that's Action 8. We have the intensification plan change, which is Action 8A. We also have completed the Winter Manaki page, and we've had various workshop and webinars that we've been involved with lots of our community members. And we're very much looking forward to implementing this and starting to getting some results for our community. There's one amendment I'd like to just correction make, and it was at page 58. This joint housing action plan, and it's an editorial change that wasn't made, so I just, that was picked up. So the Joint Housing Action Plan doesn't supersede the home strategy, it just supersedes the actions. So the intent and the direction of the home strategy will just sit alongside this, because there's some actions that we want to just continue pushing forward from a QLDC perspective. So I'll make those amendments. You'll see that Resolution 6 gives Michelle Morse, my general manager, the ability to make those design and editorial changes. So I'll make them under that, and I'll just make it consistent what was reported in the council report.
Okay. Councillors?
Yeah, thank you. Really just one question, I'll comment later on, I suppose. Firstly, the point 4 in the resolution says approve the implementation of the housing plan. And, you know, if I go to page, excuse which page I'm getting to, but the comments about financial implications, on page point 42, future budgetary needs will be determined through the long-term planning process. So I just want, we've got no understanding of what the financial implications of implementation of the housing plan will be. And I'm just wondering whether there's an internal conflict there between going, we'll implement it, but we don't know how much it's going to cost and whether it's even fundable. So I just wonder whether we could address either the wording of that or how to address that point.
Probably if I answer that, I mean, the obvious way, well, the obvious reality is 4 is always subject to funding availability, and we could amend 4 to actually simply reflect that. So we could amend 4 to read, approve the implementation of Queenstown Lakes Joint District Housing Action Plan, blah, blah. Subject to funding.
I'd be happy with that. I think that just would
That tidies that.
clarify.
Yeah.
Further questions?
Just, and there's no review clause or, just thinking about the cost of implementation and how successful it is. A lot of the actions are 1 to 2 years, or sort of 0 to 2 years, I think it was. I was just wondering, your thoughts on including in the resolution a direction to bring it back to council in 2 years' time to review their success and consider whether we still approve it. I'm not sure how that would be worded, but
We will be monitoring, so most of the KPIs and success measures will be monitored every year. So we could actually, once that reports, bring that back to council and we could just look at what's been successful, what hasn't. That could be an option.
I was thinking, yes, specifically of something that just requires it to come back and just have a full, yes, we do approve of this again. Just, I think it could help to drive achievement of some of the objectives and solutions and so on. But I just think it's really important because housing isn't squarely our remit. There's a lot of actions in there that require Central to step up. And if it's going to be a joint housing action plan, but we're funding a lot of it, I'd like to think that our partners were getting in there and making it work. So I think it would be valid to bring it back within a couple of years to re-approve it or not, depending on success. That's just I just wanted thoughts on that. But
I mean, I don't think there's any problem with that. I mean, we could add a further resolution that simply says that that staff update council on that staff update council on progress of the implementation of the joint housing action plan. I would say annually, and that would give council opportunity to at least open the conversation around the implementation. I mean,
which would give us the ability to say.
Well, I think it would be obvious. I think invariably that would be an opportunity to question the success of the program and to say actually either we want to focus on this, we don't want to focus on that. I think the step of actually formally coming back on an annual basis to report to council gives you that trigger to do that.
We were intending on doing that. It'll also be an opportunity to review and add in any additional actions. We could use that as an opportunity at that point too.
I would note that pages 27 and 28 both have quite significant measurement and monitoring already. So it's a matter of the reporting of that.
Yes, that's right. So just for clarity, you want me to read that again? Report. See if I can remember it.
Add a resolution that staff update the council on progress of the implementation of the joint housing action plan annually.
We put the word outcomes after joint housing action plan outcomes and then.
That's fine.
Yeah, I've got 5 points. Page 25, the new housing officer role, was that a QLDC role or is that established? Or-
It is, yes, so it's a strategic planning, housing, and will fall under the strategic growth team, so we have get lucky enough to have Emily Irwin starting next Thursday.
Okay.
So
Page 35, the solutions on in the plan, I've raised this before, you know, we've got things in there, then they come up later on, they're actually in the survey thing. And number 7, have we got any examples where we've actually done this? Public-private partnerships to deliver affordable housing? Do we consider that like with the Queenstown Lakes Housing Trust, or is that an example, or you got any other examples?
So there's lots of public-private examples in schools. So the Wakatipu High School was delivered sort of, you know, via something similar to that. So it's just exploring that as an option.
Okay.
Essentially what this is just doing is putting all these options on the table and saying, actually, what can we do to get some action in that affordable housing space for our community?
Okay, and number 5, I asked this last time, have there been any examples or ideas of how to incentivize developers to provide the housing? Is there any, is that work being done yet to get into any level of incentives?
Yeah, we'll be looking at different, I mean, we have a few ideas, but we'll need to test them internally and work out the financial implications, but we will be looking overseas to see what they do too.
Okay.
And looking at different models.
Yep.
But I think in particular, the developer space plays a really big part of that puzzle.
Page 50 and 51. Yeah, number 5. And then you've got, if you compare number 5 with solution 4A, I'd suggest that it's been mentioned before that 4A is tending to basically kill solution 5, incentivizing developers. Any comment on that? I know it's been raised before, and this is still a subject to a hearing through the thing, but yeah, when you, I just wonder, they seem to be counterproductive.
I think there's still an opportunity for both to work together. So you've got the two different things. You know, essentially, incentivized developers could be, how can we get rent to own, you know, more of those models across our district. I think they are two complementary actions that can work together.
Okay, cool. The page 65, 73, there's the survey responses. I'm a bit surprised. I don't know what the feedback is on the level of opposition to some of these things.
Yeah.
Have you got any sort of
Yeah,
brief dialogue on what the opposition was?
Well, I think some of the community would believe that it isn't our space to get involved in housing. I think a majority of the feedback was, you know, they really want us to see some action in this space. You know, we've had a lot of planning, we want to see some action. So I get acknowledge that. Also a couple, the Mahi QL and the Queenstown Chamber of Business, they actually represented, even though they're only two feedback, they represented a really large body of people. So we pulled that together. We had a webinar which was attended by 60 people and they posed questions. So we did a lot of work outside just the feedback process. We also went out as part of the housing capacity assessments and asked developers directly. So we did sort of a range of techniques, but I was a little bit surprised about the lack of feedback we got. And we'll be looking at the way we set it up. Maybe that was off-putting to some people. A lot of people responded at midnight. So I don't know if that also was a tale too. They might have just, but yeah, so we're having a look at that and seeing how we can get that a bit of better engagement in that space next time. But I think it's just telling a story. We've done a lot in this space already. So yeah.
I was at a business Wanaka Business Chamber meeting yesterday. For some reason they said they were invited to be part of the group because they represent a whole lot of businesses who are looking for affordable housing. And I was surprised. I asked them if they submitted to it. And they said, oh, we were told not to, we couldn't be part of it. But that seems a bit bizarre.
No.
I think communication breakdown.
Yeah, no, definitely. We would have loved to hear from them. And when Emily starts, she'll be connecting with all those types of groups
Okay.
and organisations across our district. You'll see a lot more we have a dedicated resource in this space now, so there'll be a lot more happening.
Okay, my last point was just on page 74, the solutions, this is the ranking there, average rank, just 3.64 for solution 5, I mean, it's the highest ranking one.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, the lowest
Page
one.
74. Sorry, of the feedback, yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just building the agenda numbers in.
That was the one that came up, the highest ranking from the community was the incentivise developers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to-
But actually, when you look at it, it was a small pool, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I realise that.
yeah.
Are you,
I'll come back to that later in the meeting.
Just referring to page 27, 28 and that table there. I was wondering if you could speak to the targets and some of the detail within those targets. Most of the targets represent say increase or decrease. Just wondering whether that would be fleshed out eventually within the action plan.
Yes, yep. So essentially what we, this is just sort of a holding space. We've committed to working with Okaha and Te Amarama in developing some more KPI success measures in terms of Maori outcomes. But these are currently the information that we have readily available. We're also going to be working with our partners to really dive into different information. So this is just an example of what we'll be doing. We'll be broadening that and hopefully getting access to a lot more information.
Thank you. I guess I just wanted to recognise and acknowledge that it's, it's really high level, and I think in consultation, it's quite hard for people to engage with some of those high level outcomes that we've put forward. And that's really, because it is a joint output. And I guess also to acknowledge the importance of the home strategy, and that thank you for acknowledging that it doesn't supersede it. This is a partnership response, so I guess one of the things that is frustrating is that we can't lobby within this document. We can't use it to advocate for our needs because it's a shared response. So it's really just to acknowledge that for anybody that did submit as to why it's a bit sanitised. So, and the importance of the spatial plan and the home strategy as well.
thank you.
Thank you. It's just a question around monitoring, because I think it's really important that when we do this, we're not sort of propping up low productivity and low wages, because wages are obviously part of the equation. So just on page 59, one of the monitoring is actually under measure. And it's the second from the bottom, if that makes sense. It says monitoring the percentage of businesses citing housing as a challenge to recruiting, retaining staff. Could we, when we do the work to collect that data, could we capture the wage ranges, tops and bottoms and averages of those participants so that we can get an idea?
Yeah, a big part of this too is really delving into that data story. I think it's Action 1C, and just having a really clear basis on which we move forward and we are monitoring. And also working with our partners to get access to data that we don't currently have available, like overseas investors, all that type of thing, and we can look at legislation. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
That'd be great.
Okay, councillors, you have motion before you, all 7 of them now, with 7 being the monitoring feedback every year. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Esther. Seconder. Thank you, Cody. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Motion carried. Thank you. I appreciate the work that you've done.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Item 2 seems I have differently numbered papers.
It was an updated.
Yeah, I'll probably update it.
Yeah.
So page 81.
I think it's on the old one.
Jane. Anyway.
Oh,
Item 2, proposed applicable 3 areas of public places bylaw 2018. That's 2020. No, right, yeah, adoption. Gary, Dan, sorry.
Sean.
Nice to meet you, Sean. I've met you before. Just only here.
Possibly.
That's the one. Off you go, don't go there.
Karen Williams, Policy Manager, and I have with me Sean Swinney, who is the alcohol licensing team lead, subject matter expert. Would like to take the report as read, but just unpack the options a little bit. So there's three at the end of the report. The first option is accept all the changes from the hearings panel that remain to the draft bylaws of consultation. The second option is accept some of them. The third is don't review the bylaw. And so this is reflected in recommendation 5 at the very beginning of the report, the differences between options 1 and 2 that council's being asked to deliberate on in addition to the other changes in the draft bylaw. So recommendation 5 lists the changes that the panel recommended that have arisen as a result of the consultation process that were not in the draft bylaw that went out for consultation. That makes sense?
Can you just repeat that? I didn't quite
So,
process.
yeah, absolutely. So that recommendation 5 at the beginning of the report, it lists the changes that the hearings panel have
Yeah.
recommended that weren't in the draft bylaw that went out to the community,
Yeah, okay.
right?
Yeah.
That council's being asked to make a decision on today. So those include changing the timing from 8 PM to 8 AM to 6 PM to 6 AM. Retaining Frankton, Arrowtown and Hawea. Adding Christmas and Boxing Day as permanent bans for Wanaka. Revisions to the maps and changing the terminology that you see in the report from the use of the word ban to alcohol free. So that they've all come about as a result of the consultation process that council is being asked to discuss today. So I will leave it there and turn it over to questions. Hopefully that's helped tease it out a bit rather than complicate it.
So just to comment on that, if I understand correctly, the resolution or recommendation as it's written reflects option 1 of the 3 options at the end of the report to adopt the changes made by the hearing.
So recommendation. Sorry,
So the recommendation as it's written here, including number 5, as you've just pointed out to us, that reflects option 1 of the 3 options.
correct.
Yeah. But
Yes,
you're recommending
yes.
option 2 to give us the ability, if we want to change some of part 5, section 5 or number 5.
Yes.
And it's B and C that you're suggesting we're cautious around, correct?
Correct, it's discussed in the body.
Yeah.
Questions? You first. Oh, ma'am.
Is there a risk because some of these is not what we went out to consultation on, so we didn't consult on changing from 6 to 8. And we did consult on removing Frankton, Arrowtown, Hawea, and now they're added back in. Is there a risk that we would need to consult on that again?
3-year workshop, just to tease those into 2 different ones, with the change in the time by 2 hours. That is considered well within the scope of the paper proposal that went out for consultation for council to choose either way. Regarding, and the same answer applies to the Frankton, Arrowtown, Hawea. So the way the statement of proposal was drafted allows council the scope to go either way on it. It was clear to the community that either one could move a certain distance.
And just to clarify that point, is that because we didn't consult on the option of a 24-hour ban, that's not within scope of what we could reasonably decide at the 365-day 24-hour ban.
3-year workshop, yes, that is outside the scope of what we went to the community.
At appropriate time, and not take your guidance as to whether it's now or a bit later, I'm happy to comment on the considerations of the panel as chair of the panel.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. Just one question.
So just with I guess we have to decide for B and C, the options that you're recommending caution around with the evidence. I'm just wondering, because it has to meet the test of evidence for disorder occurring during the proposed ban time that is linked to alcohol consumption in that place. And it's the in that place that I'd like some guidance on, because what does the case law say around what in that place means? Because we do have some evidence before us of disorder and so on and so forth. But how have the courts treated, and if we don't know, that's fine, but how have the courts treated in that place?
Through your worship, it is not just, as you can imagine, a quantitative exercise of data. It is qualitative, so it has to do with the photos you see in there, with the anecdotal information we get through submissions from people in the community, from police, from stakeholders. And it is just trying to tease apart how much information as a whole, whether it be hard data as opposed to reports that comes together. And it's there's not a, it's great.
It's great. Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillor?
Well, I've got quite a few comments, or not so much questions, but just comments on some of the things. And I do follow on from what Nikki's saying, and I raised this last council meeting. It does come down to the grey area of evidence, and you warn, or you don't, you caution throughout this item about having the evidence, because I guess some of the, we put it in the bylaw, I guess it becomes, you suggest, challengeable if there isn't a robust basis of evidence for the decisions. Is that correct? It's challengeable.
Yes, that's the issue, is that there's a certain amount of risk involved.
Okay, so I've read through it, and I do respect the fact that I wasn't on the hearing panel. We had, and we're going to hear from Quentin shortly, which is good. I was encouraging to see more evidence, but I still don't believe there's. I've seen enough evidence from those pictures and that to show that there's grounds to go to bring the hours 6 p.m, 8 p.m. back to 6 p.m. Okay, I've got no problem with the 6 a.m, but I just didn't see any strong evidence to show that there was a lot of disorder and crime happening in these areas between 6 and 8. And you can look at all the diagrams. So I'd support an 8 p.m. to 6 a.m, but that's my view on that. Retaining the all year round bans in Frank and Narrowtown, once again, I didn't see any evidence on to even talk about bringing them back into it, because they were taken out of the ban area. Christmas Boxing Day, yes, there was evidence to show in Queenstown. They had a bit of a, and I don't know what year it was, they had a lot of trouble there, and that's like that, but I still haven't seen any evidence to show that Christmas Day and Boxing Day in Wanaka, and I say that Frankton, Narrowtown and Harvey, if you bring them into it, would pass the test of the LGA 147A brackets 1. The revision of the maps, looking at the data that was provided with all the dots on it, I only honed in on the Wanaka one. I agree with revising the maps. I think they've done a good job there, but I'm still trying to understand on the Wanaka one what the evidence and justification is having a ban south of Brownston Street, just in that urban area. Compared with some of the other urban areas that seem to have just as many dots, if not more, way out further. And the last one is the name change. It is a very definitive word, ban. It is and I'd like to get feedback from the staff on this. It's a term used, I guess, throughout New Zealand, alcohol bans. We have a lot of people coming to our district from other areas of New Zealand. If you come in here and you go to an alcohol-free area, are they expecting to get free alcohol? I don't know. I don't. But all I'm suggesting is ban is a common term used out in New Zealand. If they come here, it's an alcohol ban. There's no question. If it's alcohol-free, what does that mean? Oh, free to what? I don't know. I just don't understand it. So I have trouble supporting that. I do not support going out to another review of this bylaw in the near future to consider a 365-day a year ban. Under our process of doing our budgeting the next few years, operational sense, we need to really prioritise where we want to spend our money, and I don't think we've got justification for a significant amount of money to go on another bylaw review in the next few years, unless there's a heck of a lot of evidence to support a change on that. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
So before, so I appreciate your thoughts, Councillor Cox. I think we just need to be very mindful of the process that we are part of. So council put out a proposed bylaw at soil submissions. You empowered a subset of councillors to be the hearings panel. They saw the written evidence, and they heard the verbal evidence and representations of a variety of people. I think it's largely incumbent on council to follow the direction of the hearings panel unless they believe that there is considerable risk with those decisions. At that point, council, in my view, has two choices. One, that can decline to continue with the bylaw, or it can actually rehear the submissions. And I would recommend that council is the mind to vary significantly from what's been recommended by the hearings panel, that should be a hearings panel of the entire council. Otherwise, you're actually beginning to undermine the work that the committee that you appointed did. So you're entitled not to agree with it, but I think you've got to be very careful about picking and choosing what you do and don't like, given that, as you rightly pointed out, Councillor Cox, and thank you for sharing it, that it was the councillors that were the hearings panel who considered all the material in front of them.
Yeah, thank you for that, but Mr. True Chair, but I thought we just had from the staff the indication that the recommended option is option 2, and then we had explained that number 5, strike out if change not adopted by council, with brackets there. So I thought that opened the door. I do understand it completely with the panel had just made the recommendation without all that, and the staff had recommended option 1. I have no problem, but why would you recommend or put that wording in there if you weren't expecting some feedback from us around this table and some option to possibly strike out or change that resolution?
And I accept that, and that's a valid point, and I accept that we should have been clearer about that.
Okay.
But my considered opinion is that there are some things, the terminology, ban versus alcohol area, is probably not a material in that sense, though I take your point entirely. But when we're starting to, I suppose, make evaluative judgments, contrary to what the hearings panel, who you empowered to hear it, reached, I think you've got to be very careful how far you go before you actually start to question the degree to which you have the evidence to do that.
Yeah, through the chair, I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel that they may have seen evidence that we didn't see in the report that justifies, in accordance with Local Government Act 147A1, to do this. So thank you.
So on there, I'll stop one question. When you talk about Frankton, Arrowtown and Harwea, what evidence did the police provide? I'm just looking through those slides, and apart from that one little magnified bit where you're seeing the eyes, see the areas, what other slides that provide for those areas?
Through your worship, the evidence that was provided by police that was over and above what councillors had to what the bylaw that went up for consultation is that slide presentation and attachment D to the report, and that's got the hotspots and times of infringements related to alcohol throughout. So it's page 149 of the agenda. So that is the information that the panel received.
Still on it?
Correct.
Just going to this. So when I looked at 154, probably 152 on your plan, on your numbering, the only piece of data I see for Frankton, Harwea, for Arrowtown is that little blown up little. Is that it? Just that one right there. Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, councillors, any further questions? Go.
Perhaps a question to the panel, and Quentin may answer this for us. Totally understand the evidence that we've been presented with and the 8 till 8 guidelines and the Christmas Day. I'm 100% comfortable with the 6 till 6. I have some questions around why we feel it's so pertinent to pull it forward to 6 p.m. and to 6 a.m. I suppose I look at our seasonality. 6 o'clock in the summer is peak middle of the day. A lot of our workforce don't get off work until 5 o'clock. A lot of our families prefer not to take their children into licensed premises to drink, but would like to have a picnic in our public areas along the Arrowtown River or along the lakefront. And I feel that I'd like to understand more about the evidence in that. I see the alcohol related harm incidents, but I reflect councillor Cadding's comments that we don't know whether that harm originated from people drinking in a public space or in a licensed premises. I know that there was not enough sufficient evidence to perhaps apply as much weighting to the ban in Arrowtown, but I understand the police need and deserve mechanisms to enable them to remove people from the street should trouble start. I've gone out and consulted with quite a lot of our community around hospitality operators and people that use these experiences. The hospitality operators reflected to me that it is great for them to have a mechanism to get people into their bars. So thank you. As far as getting them off the streets and where we can exhibit some host responsibility. However, they didn't feel that 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock really made much of a difference in that preloading environment. And there was also some commentary around how close the 6 a.m. kickoff time is again to people coming out of licensed premises as they close and lingering around till 6 in the morning, highly intoxicated and starting to drink again, where at least 8 a.m. they might go home and go to bed. So I've just got these concerns that we're pulling the beginning time into the middle of our peak summer day and perhaps harshly penalising the majority of our community. And some of the feedback I got to that was we might end up with a few good law breakers. That just seems at odds to me with the bylaw. And I've got concerns that we're pulling it forward in the morning when really how many people are drinking between 6 and 8. And I just, yeah, it's that 8 till 8 to 6 till 6. So I'm keen to hear from the panel as to what evidence it really swung you that it needed to be brought into those earlier operating hours.
Thank you. And look, I understand many of these issues that are being raised by the councillors were discussed and understood by the panel. We had a very good presentation and very good discussion from Simon Matheson of the police, who presented the evidence and discussed it at length with us. We gave him quite a broad window of opportunity to have a pretty frank discussion with us about the data that he presented, which was incredibly beneficial. And I'll speak specifically, and you know, if there's any other feedback from my fellow councillors who are on the panel, they're welcome to do that. Firstly, the 6 to 6, and I mean, I think this is actually relatively straightforward, is if you go to the data that was provided and, you know, if we go to 143, which was the Queenstown events where there was if you to allocate a bracket as cleanly as possible over the hours where the incidents occur, it would basically be between 4:30 in the afternoon and 4:30 in the morning. So the fact that we have not done that and gone 6 to 6 is probably actually, if anything, a softer approach, not and there's a very clear delineation as to when those events, alcohol-related events, start and stop. And it was very clear that from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, there was no justification for it, and there is a justification for it at 6 p.m. to 6 to 8 p.m. And you know, we deliberately tried to respond appropriately to the evidence that was before us. And I take your point that we should be evidence-based. Regard to retaining the year-round bans at how we are, you know, while we applied a little bit of local knowledge, if you like, to how events have occurred there, I am painfully aware that there was a serious sexual assault at Lake Hawea in the not too recent past, at not far from the Hawea Hotel during the New Year's period. So for Hawea, and I can't speak as intimately around Frankton and Arrowtown, but for Hawea, I am more than comfortable that the serious incidents at Hawea are sufficient to justify the continuation of the ban during that period. And, you know, that, you know, saving one serious sexual assault or physical assault, in my view, is sufficient grounds to, and not saying it would have, but if that's sufficient grounds to continue the ban that has been in place for some time. Equally, there is clearly evidence that Christmas Day and Boxing Day have had issues in Queenstown in the past. While I accept there isn't as considerable evidence at Wanaka, there was an attempt to apply some consistency and avoid confusion across the district as to whether, when and where and what time things started and stopped. So we did apply some consistency, I suppose. Councillor Cox acknowledged the maps. We did use the maps by using the where the stars and arrows and things were developed, you know, where the incidents occurred. We did include areas that hadn't previously, but we also narrowed areas where clearly urban areas that didn't have a record of incidences were removed. We also took on board comments from the police that how they managed the town centre, as in the entry points, particularly in Wanaka, the entry points to the town centre over the New Year period was where they intercept and take alcohol away from people. So we tried to apply some logic as to where, well, and talk to the police about where those points are, where are the intercept points natural, where naturally people funnel or focus. So we revised the maps on that basis. And, you know, to be fair, there wasn't a lot of discussion around the naming. It wasn't a big issue for the panel. And we just sort of were happy to take that on advice. I am comfortable. I accept that if we were to go to a 24-hour, 365-day ban, we would possibly be stretching the evidence case. It was something that was sought by the police and something that we're happy for council to determine whether that they want to take that forward. It's still something the police would love to see. I'm more than comfortable that the recommendations from the committee are reasonable in regard to the evidence that we had before us. And, you know, I do suggest if you want to make a different decision, you should hear the evidence yourself, as Mike suggested.
Thank you. Thanks, Quentin. I have heard in previous workshops from the police as well. So from an evidence-based point of view, we may not be able to see everything in the report, but we have been made aware of it on previous occasions. I would like to just ask why we chose free rather than ban. The word.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah. That was a basis of a submission from the Cancer Society that that ban is sort of stigmatizing alcohol. It is Sharon, do you want to speak to this? Because it was raised in the 2018 review as well. Okay. That they were disappointed that we are using this language. And that
it's the same with like smoke free as well, isn't it? So rather than things, yeah. Okay.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Public health are in line with the Cancer Society in terms of changing the wording from ban.
Okay.
Yeah, but as you say, along with the smoke free.
Okay. Thank you.
But just to conclude that, completely open to council to go either way on that based on the feedback. That's it's council prerogative. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's well, from my point of view, I think if we align with other districts and other policies, it's probably better because then we're using the same language. And the other thing that I guess I just hold some caution around is, I think we've got to be reflective of any unconscious bias that we might have ourselves around what's nuisance drinking and what's okay. So when we use words like picnicking with families, that's okay. And we think of something else as nuisance. So, and I recognise that picnicking with family is not a nuisance, but my point is, I think we just have to be careful about a form of elitism in our view of what's okay versus what's not okay.
What's disorder?
So, well, because it's preventative, right? So it doesn't become disorder until it becomes disorder. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody from a family won't go home and there might be domestic violence or whatever. I'm just speculating, but I guess I'm just saying we just need to be careful about the way we perceive things. So yeah, it might be inconvenient that I can't picnic with my family at 6 p.m. and have a drink, but is it for the right reason? So I guess it's just to challenge us with that thought. So my questions stick really around the 6 to 8 and the reasons why. So I've heard what you've said, and I did watch the deliberations online, the police bit twice. I still couldn't get my head around why the move. So I called Simon, I had a conversation with him directly. And my understanding from him was he didn't believe that the 6 to 8 would make a difference. And then he was actually worried about moving the 8 to the 6 for the reasons that Lisa spoke to before, and that 6 a.m. is a lot closer to closing times, and you could then have very drunk people allowed to start drinking on the beach, as opposed to the other end of the day where it's slightly more social. So yes, he was advocating for 24 hours a day in quite specific pockets, wasn't necessary. He wasn't really bothered with the Frankton, Arrowtown, Hawea places, and his 24-hour ban was quite CBD focused in Queenstown and Wanaka. So I feel like we've tried to kind of go for a middle ground, but we've missed the mark slightly. And yeah, I wasn't convinced from him that well, he didn't convince me. He said that the 6 to 8 wouldn't make any difference from their point of view.
All I can say is that we responded specifically to the evidence that he provided to us, in that when the disorder events are most likely to occur, it was the data he provided to us.
Yeah.
And as I said, from 4:30.
I guess
actually, and that's not at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Well, but there's also the argument it's not at 6 o'clock in the morning because there's been a ban in place already for 6 o'clock in the morning.
True.
So, and I guess one of my other, general concerns with the data is there's no evidence linking the drinking in public places. It's just drinking full stop. We don't know where it happened at home and bars. And I feel like by moving, for me, the biggest thing is 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. 6 p.m. for Queenstown in the summer is the middle of the afternoon. It's not an evening. 8 p.m. the sun hasn't even set yet. So I feel like that's a big shift and a big disadvantage for the people that live here.
Just got one question for you raised. It's an uncomfortable thing you raised about the sexual assault in Hawea. Do you have an actual date for that?
No, I don't, but I'm reasonably confident it was over the New Year period in the last number of years. I can't, and equally there was a long history of disorder at Hawea when they used to run the concerts out there and stuff. So, you know, I think there's
so the only reason why I raise it is because there is a ban between the 27th of December and 6th of January.
Well, no, we're being asked to remove that, remember, and we kept it in place.
Yeah, but there was a ban there, but that assault would have happened during the ban. That's what I'm raising.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure, but
So,
it doesn't
So I'm pointing out that the argument of a ban may stop sexual assault, but if that's the case, if it happened during the ban, as a kid,
We're going to rabbit hole there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Rightio. I've got a few things. I mean, obviously I was on the hearing panel. The evidence for changing the times was really, I mean, some of the other bans we've had other than the year-round one were based on a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. time frame anyway. So this change that's proposed now brings all of those different bandy times, timeframes into line with each other. Also, the evidence that was presented to us shows that the harm that potentially happens is not from drinking at that time, it's from drinking that's happened earlier. So by bringing that time frame forward by 2 hours at 6 o'clock, we're curtailing an extra 2 hours of someone's drinking time that they might have started sometime earlier. And that then potentially reduces the amount they're taking on board, and which then leads to harm happening later on. So the time frame for the harm was really focused around the early hours of the morning. So by bringing it for those 2 hours, it brings it in line with the other bans and other timeframes that we had, but also gives more scope to limit that time frame for people to drink too much, I guess. The wording change was also supported by the National Public Health Service, and they've clearly said in their submission that the use of the free term rather than the ban term has been shown to be effective So it was relatively straightforward for us to go with it. I mean, it's a word, but it's, you know, the current thinking is to use that terminology rather than a negative type of word such as ban. The other thing that also Simon Matheson mentioned is that the thing that they can't record because there's so much of it, and it's not recorded in their statistics, is the interventions and education that they do out on the street. When people are drinking, they might not be creating disorder, but the police will intervene, tell them that they can't be drinking there, got to tip it out or take it home or go away from the area. Those incidents aren't recorded, and there's the anecdotal evidence from them is that there's a significant number of those interventions. So that, you know, potentially if that data was recorded, that would be also evidence to show that people are trying to drink in those areas, which then would lead on to harm if it was unchecked. There was also a drive to, well, there was definitely a preference among a number of the submitters to look at a 24-hour year-round ban. You know, we've come to the conclusion that that's outside of what was consulted on. It will be difficult to push that through at this stage, but that's where we've talked about considering it in the future. And, you know, when we're saying at the next review, at a review of the bylaw, that might be at the next review, which has got to happen at some point in the future anyway. So, so maybe that's when that comes into play. That's reviewed at that stage. There was also comments made that drinking out in public places is generally unsupervised, and certainly for the CBD areas, there are plenty of options for people to drink at whatever time of the day they choose for that reason, and supervised premises, and that is the preference for people to be drinking. Is in an area, in a location or a premises where they can be supervised, and if they getting beyond the limit, then they can be monitored. And just on a personal note, the comments about having a picnic with your family in the evening, you can still have a picnic with your family at evening. You don't need to drink alcohol to have one. And our family has done this and been affected by people that have been drinking. They were able to carry on drinking till 8 o'clock. The behaviour that they exhibited was shocking, and I actually called the police. Police came down, but they really limited what they could do with them until it got to 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, they spoke to the young men and moved them on, and that trouble ceased. But that's the time when families are going home, because they've had their evening in the sun and it's time to go home now. So in my view, the argument for having a picnic on the beach is enforced by, well, is backed up by having this ban brought forward to this alcohol-free area, brought forward to 6 p.m. And as Quinn said, the evidence to do that was relatively compelling, and the evidence was actually to bring it forward even further. But we've gone to a middle ground, lined it up with other timeframes that we already alluded to anyway.
Councillors, any further? We've drifted into discussion, so
I'm happy to move that we adopt it as the hearing panel recommended if it's appropriate.
1, 2, 3. Option 1 through
Yeah,
1 through to 7.
Option 1, yeah.
We have a mover. Is there a seconder? I'll second it. There a seconder. All those in favour?
Right. We just have a
Hands up,
quick show of hands, please. So
3, 4, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 5. Is that correct? Copy. 5, 6. Got the recording. The motion is carried. Councillors, good discussion. Item 3, activities bylaw. Apparently it's 184 on my papers, but it might be 182 on yours. Over to Kerry, yes, with a few.
Yes, you've got me again, and you've also got Gina Gaz, who is the monitoring enforcement team lead to speak to this. I'll take the report as read. The hearing panel will probably have information to add. I guess I just wanted to highlight the changes that the hearings panel recommended were 4 that I want to highlight: to put clarity in the bylaw that anti-competitive behaviour between buskers won't be tolerated into the bylaw. It was implicit, but that's been fleshed out. The second one is that buskers, pop-up stalls, so that's vendors along the lakefront in the main, in this case, and charity street collectors, that they carry proof of their registration. That wasn't explicit in the bylaw formally. The third item that they recommended was, and it actually just was a bit of an organic process through the hearings process, is that we clarify in the bylaw that this current system where those buskers and the pop-up stores and the charity street collectors, they do an online registration process. That is the status quo, but that wasn't as clear in the bylaw wording as it could have been. And we've highlighted that and clarified it. And the fourth item is around the development of what would a smoke-free, there's that free terminology, policy look like for council. So those are just the four things I wanted to highlight that came out of the hearings process. Possibly the panel want to speak to other things, but otherwise I will take the report as read.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Okay.
I've got a really simple one. What is QLDC's definition of a busker?
Busking is actually, you can find it on page 215 of the paper agenda. I think that's now 215, but there's a definition of busking, which means the provision of entertainment on or in a public place, usually while soliciting money or money's worth, and includes, but is not limited to, playing an instrument, singing, dancing, juggling, mime, puppetry, performance, art, conjuring, acrobatics, recitation, undertaking artworks, and performing other acts of theatrical or visual forms. It does not include advertising or promotion.
Or councillors standing on soapboxes.
In
the street.
There you go.
Thank you.
Relations. No.
Yes, I'm happy with that. Can I ask a second question?
Go for it.
With relation to the point that they must display, must have proof on them, is there potentially an option for them to display that registration proof?
Through your 100%, yes, I can imagine that they may have it on their device, show that online registration if requested, if that would be.
No, I mean, like while busking, they would have it on display.
Like a paper, that is certainly open to council if that's how it would like to proceed. Do you have any comments on that, Izzy, whether that will affect your team at all?
No, it made it easier.
It would make it much easier for you to be able to spot.
So I comment on that as the chair of the hearings panel.
Yeah, go for it.
So this came up quite a bit in terms of the anti-competitive behaviour. So some buskers are just people that arrive for 24 hours busk that don't have permits, and those that do have permits are, are saying you can't go here. This is where I am, and blah blah blah. And there's lots of trouble caused by it. So the whole point that we've made the online registration explicit now is because there wasn't any proof. So 100% I think we should be supporting actual evidence that the audience or passers-by can see that. Because the other thing that came up is that long-term buskers that live here, they haven't got a leg to stand on when they kind of confront somebody who hasn't got a license. So I think if it became the norm that we were showing it, then passers-by would begin to see that there's a pattern there.
Is it within scope?
Yeah, is it within scope to do that?
Through your, absolutely, I would probably recommend it minuted that wordings will be added further to what's already been proposed around having visual evidence of registration, or to that effect. My wordsmithing capabilities are.
We just changed 5B to
Yes, I know.
is to carry and display proof of registration.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, it's the word display, isn't it? Because I think at the moment sometimes it's shown, but what we're actually suggesting is that it's displayed throughout the whole performance. Is that what we're suggesting?
Yeah.
I think that's what Matt was.
Yeah.
Happy to move that.
Good challenge.
Oh, no, that's right. We'll get there.
Thank you. Good chair. I'm coming in from this anti-competitive behaviour point of view as well, and picking up on this point about our long-term buskers. I was approached by a member of our long-term busking community. First point of concern for them is that they are a neurodiverse member of our community who is dyslexic and ADHD and didn't feel that they could make submission through the public forum because that was beyond their capability, and were questioning me as to how to find another way to have a voice. They explained to me that the community of our long-term buskers operate a system down on the performance space where they all put a number into a hat and they draw an order that they perform in, and that's pulled at a certain time of day and has been a ritual of culture that's embraced and committed to by all those buskers. Some of the anti-competitive behaviour has been from people who haven't participated in that draw, and one example was given of a very reputable brass band within our community who start performing at the top of the mall, walk down the mall onto the performance place regardless of who is performing, and take on that space, and that has created some conflict between the different regular contributors in our entertainment space. So that band had sought to relocate themselves along to the Memorial Gate area, and that there was some compromises as to which areas were being inhabited by this. This person came to me because they were very concerned that they're getting a bad reputation as buskers around being antagonizers or something in this space, where they're saying we have tried within ourselves to come up with a fair and equitable way to show that there's not competitive behaviour, it's the luck of the draw, and they just wanted to be heard in saying we're not as agitators, we're not acting as intimidation and insulting and abusing perhaps as some of the submissions may have come across there. So just to share that from our community member who felt they couldn't have a written voice because they just can't put their words onto paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah.
So because I've also got a question about that, and just in terms of clarifying, I guess, Matt's question about, Councillor Long's question about the definition of busking. It says in the definition, usually for, well, soliciting money or money's worth, but where do performers who aren't soliciting for money or money's worth fall into it, such as bagpipers, who are just there for a place to play?
They do solicit money, don't
they? Kevin's question is, what if they're just there just to play in public, not soliciting money?
Definition isn't exclusively about soliciting money, so I think any public performance would be deemed busking. I think Carrie, is that?
It's true, yes, that's my understanding as well, that they use the word usually pretty intentional, that it's a public performance that they would be captured with the title.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment about accessibility and accommodating people in our community. I presume that council would support anyone in preparing a submission who needed assistance to some degree. If they approach the public community service or the library or something, there'll be some assistance given to people with difficulty in doing that themselves as an accessibility support.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the first I've heard of that. Niall, I'm sure we would pick that up. If someone felt that they had circumstances that they struggled to make the submission in a normal way, they simply need to contact us. We could possibly look to raise that profile on the way we advertise and make that available. We certainly want to help anybody to make a submission.
I'd imagine that was the case, and I just thought I'd make the point because I think we should, both under our disability policy and accessibility, we should actually make some effort to make that available.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Any further questions on the activities in public places by law? We have a mover. It's got one mover and a seconder for items 1 through to 8, with that slight adjusted note on 5B where it is carry and display proof of registration. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? None. Motion carried. Councillors. Cemeteries bylaw. Gary.
Thank you.
Page 240 or might be 238. Gary, Aaron, is it?
Yes.
Over to you.
Yes, I am. I'm a policy advisor on the policy team, and this is Tarsi Kunchis, who's our heritage and cemeteries officer. We have for the review of the cemeteries bylaw 2017, and I take the report as read and happy to take any questions.
Questions, councillors?
One, and it was just around the change that at 16.11, I think it was, and I won't go into it, but it just talked about the ability to kind of remove things and disrepair, which I think is enabled by the law, and I didn't go back to the act to see whether that's just an automatic thing that we can do, and we've just put it into the bylaw because, but I just wondered in terms of consultation, would we be able to, is there a way to go out specifically to the people who have plots and who have those things and to just consult directly with those stakeholders to remind them or something and let them know this is coming up and point that out? I just thought these were quite sensitive things, and this repair can be subjective. People might live away. That was my only point.
Your worship, I'll pass that to Tarsi.
So the answer would be yes, as long as we have contact details for the plot owners, there is the possibility that we could create some sort of mailing list and perhaps send out a notification. I don't know that we would necessarily specify, look specifically at this one thing.
Yeah.
And address this one thing, but maybe to say, hey, we're doing consultation on the bylaw, you have a plot, this would apply to you, please do have a look. Yeah, so as long as we have those contact details, we should, and that is kind of tied to the history of plots. So there be some older ones that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All good.
I just said one thing on the updated version of the document, and the title and the contents page, item 15, just needs to be updated, I think, to the wording that's used in the document. The indigent persons need to be persons without means.
Was that so?
That's in the actual contents page, you still use the word indigent, as opposed to the more modern inclusive term.
Persons without means.
It's Gavin. Councillor Bartley doing his normal attention to detail approach.
Well done, Gavin.
Thank you. I appreciate this isn't a particular area of expertise of mine. It isn't in cemeteries, I can assure you. But I recall there was quite a lot of discussion around natural burials, and I just wanted to ensure that that has been accommodated in the bylaws sufficiently to meet the demand, if you like, for such things.
So through you, your worship, actually that sort of topic is going to fall within the handbook.
The handbook, right?
Yeah, so it's more of a change in our operational procedure. And due to that, it fits better into the handbook. Nothing in the bylaw would restrict us from being able to develop that. But that's where that's gonna sit.
That answers that question, and I was really intrigued by the language. It never occurred to me that to inter someone is to bury them, but you learn something every day. So.
There's also mushroom burials and
Mushrooms. We've got to choose 4 councillors for a panel. If you all go quietly, we'll start. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mr. Matt and Lisa. Thank you. And just before we move and go, I just want to thank Tarsi. I know we did our first Muslim burial. We did end of last year, or
it was October.
October last year. Yeah, so
And if you'd like to know, the beam is going in next week, so we'll have the official beam and they can put their plant on the new plant.
Brilliant, thank you. And the other one, I've just got a little quick question come from Anzac though. I had one of the territorials come over, he was from the war graves. He looks after the war graves, and he told me that we have 2 in the Queenstown cemetery here that have not been recognised on any memorial. Any, there's no memorial or any acknowledgement of them. So I'd be pretty interested for that to be traced up on.
You may have said there was one in Arrowtown.
Yes, one in Arrowtown as well.
And that there, at the time, potentially reasons behind that, but now with a historic perspective, that should be some information.
Yeah, I was saying what it's a bit of information on.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, good. Okay, so we have our 4. Do I have any mover? Thank you, Esther. Seconder. Thank you, Cody. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carried. Thank you. Please got Erin coming, staying with you as well. Item 5, QLDC council submissions, page 275, 273. Over to you, Erin or Kerry.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got 4 submissions for retrospective approval and have to take them from the spread and any questions.
Councillors. Nikki.
No question, actually, but I just wanted to say thanks to the staff for excellent submissions, thanks to the climate reference group for their input. And to Andrew Wilson for taking the accommodation supplement petition to Parliament. Thank you, they're great.
All there, do I have a mover? Thank you, Matt. Seconded by Esther. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? None. Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, item 6. Lake Kawea, MPSUD, page 291, 289. And do we have someone online? Still online?
Previously approved by council. But the team here is going to give a brief outline in terms of what's this about and be able to answer some questions that you might have. But I just wanted to note at the outset that I think there have been some concerns about how intensification like this may be serviced through infrastructure in the future. And I think it's important to note that it's considered that if we were to, it's unlikely any decisions would be made to intensify areas if we were to have substantive information on what those future infrastructure solutions were going to be to support these areas. It is strategic decisions like this that are actually going to drive the solutions in place for future infrastructure for roading and three waters. And I think it's important to note that you're going to have very motivated parties in play to be able to drive those solutions forward in the future. So this really is and I suppose that strategic decision after notification is what I'm talking about here. This one today is just about the notification process. And just to remember also that subdivisions of land in the future to actually provide for development in these areas will have to go through a process that will require servicing and adequate servicing capacity to be in place. So just in relation to some of the servicing matters that might be out there, I just wanted to put that there at the outset. And I can just put it as team to give you some more updates on what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Is it Natalie, is it? Yeah. Welcome, Natalie. Okay, questions, councillor. Oh, EJ, sorry.
Just do a brief intro. Kia ora councillors, my name is EJ Matia. I'm a senior planner at the QLDC and the author of the agenda report on the inclusion of the Lake Highway South and the urban intensification notification. I take the report as read, but can give a broad summary of what the variation entails. We have a team here to clarify matters if required. The Lake Highway South land is now zoned urban and is subject to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. This agenda item seeks endorsement to include the land in the urban intensification variation that has already been endorsed for public notification by the council. In practice, what is proposed is for this land to its intensification through changes to the existing zone provisions, mainly through changes to height and density provisions in the low density zone, medium density zone, and the local shopping centre zone. No changes are proposed to the planning maps or rezonings. The changes proposed in provisions are consistent with the same changes that have been approved for notification for the low density suburban residential zone within the existing highway township. The proposed changes to provisions would further support opportunities for attached housing typologies and smaller houses. This is in response to the MPSUD Policy 1 requirements that requires a range of housing typologies in different price ranges for the urban environment to be considered a well-functioning urban environment. It also responds to the Housing Capacity Assessment 2021, which although it shows that we overall do have enough, that we overall do not have a shortfall in housing capacity, there will be a shortfall in the long-term attached housing typologies in the Wanaka Lake Highway reporting area, and the growing shortage of housing in the lower price band across the district. The key matter to highlight is that while the land has not yet been developed, it is now zoned urban and it is therefore subject to the MPSUD, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. This was not the case when we considered the intensification variation for the other areas recently. The variation is an opportunity to support the efficient use of urban land for urban development. The variation would be incorporated into the urban intensification variation that has been approved by council for notification and will be put through a Schedule 1 RMA consultation process so that any interested parties can submit. Lastly, I would like to table a response memo to the written clause 4 consultation feedback we have received from EV authorities. This has been circulated already to councillors, but also needs to be included for public to view. We've got some printed copies also if you guys want any.
Yeah, and I think I should note that the document I sent last night with all my commentary in it was not totally intended, but it's good that you can see a transparent process occurring in relation.
Setting new levels of transparency. So we apologize every time we talk about how we've got a staff member late at night having to answer things. But apologies if taken the brunt. But yeah, David Allison.
Just stop it from.
This is all we have. Sorry.
Oh, that's
there you go. You can I'll share.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, questions, councillors. Okay.
Thanks for all the work you've done on that. My concern is around whether this meets the requirements to intensify on policy 5, or whether we're doing it for another reason, because policy 1 won't allow it. I went back to the original section 32 report. So there's a bit of chat in this question. Went back to the original section 32 report, and on page 5 it says, the scope of the proposed variation is limited to existing urban areas which meet the requirements of policy 5 in terms of accessibility and or relative demand. Right, so that was the original section 32, and I know that Barker and Associates has when they've done their assessment around relative demand and accessibility, they've looked at potential accessibility and potential relative demand, right? And that's been acknowledged, and Dave acknowledged that in his email last night. So for me, I'd just like some clarity around what the staff think, because when you look at policy 5, it speaks to accessibility by existing or planned active or public transport to a range of commercial activities and services. And planned is actually defined in relation to transport in the policy statement. And it says planned in relation to forms or features of transport means planned in a regional land transport plan prepared and approved under the Land Transport Management Act. So to me, if we start to say that Hawea meets the requirement of policy 5 to intensify based on potential accessibility rather than planned accessibility, we are undermining the variation as a whole, because we could then have people coming in and saying, well, there's potential in all these other areas. But two, we don't need to do it. And so I'd like, clarity around whether the staff think that we have to do it under policy 5 or we'd like to do it under policy 1.
I can respond to that to the chair. So as a starting point, when we did our accessibility assessments on policy 5, the consultants acknowledged that most of our urban environment is relatively quite accessible, walkable, and they had to refine that assessment to basically have meaningful differences between different areas, and that fed it into having to still keeping meaning different zones, having a distinct medium density zone and a distinct low density zone. But the proposed changes is not just responding to that accessibility assessment, it's also to give effect to the wider directive, in other words, policy 1.
Yeah, so do you think, just to be really clear, do you think we have to intensify Hawea based on the modelling? Do we have to intensify it under policy 5? Or is that test not met? Because planned says it has to be planned or existing, and it has to be planned in a document budgeted for.
Yeah.
And so if we start to say that the modelling says that we have to intensify to this level, are we being disingenuous and are we putting at risk our whole process? Because we need to stick to the modelling and be consistent in how we treat all the different areas through the district. And I feel like we've looked at the modelling and gone, actually, potential, relative demand and potential accessibility based on services that might come because we're intensifying. We've taken those and plunged them in, and we've made our assessment based on that, on potential rather than actual. And I think that's a risk for our whole plan change. But also, if we don't have to do it, in my mind, the community should have a right. I'm not against intensification, but I think we don't have to do it. The community has a right to consultation. Iwi has a right to more meaningful consultation, potentially. And so that's my concern. So I think we need a really definitive answer around, do we have to do this under policy 5 based on the modelling?
So we don't have to do everything. We have come up with a methodology how we think it was a good idea to implement policy 5 for the experts test. Right, so policy 5 says that commensurate with the level of accessibility in the market. So we've come up with a defendable position, a defendable methodology, but we're also giving effect to the wider directive, which is diversity in housing supply, attached housing. We're responding to our section 35 monitoring report that's saying that the provisions currently is not basically the medium density zone is not a medium density zone. We're responding to those things, and we also
Hang on, just let BJ finish.
So if you want to box policy 5 and say we're only allowed to look at this, it will be very short-sighted, because every landowner looks at the whole national policy statements and all the directives it's trying to achieve, including housing diversity, including is the council changing our zones, responding to our section 35 monitoring report that says your zone is not functioning or achieving the objectives that it is. So it would be short-sighted to try and box the methodology and say this part of your methodology has only looked at existing and then not looking at the recommendations that came out of that methodology. For example, 3 parks at the moment is zoned for commercial. The recommendation as a result of this methodology and assessment from the urban designers say, all right, it's not yet developed there, but we're also recommending upzoning to high density in 3 parks. So that's an example. However, it's a similar situation. So the recommendation, even though the methodology mostly focused on existing accessibility, the recommendation from the experts looked at a practical approach looked at future as well for 3 parks in highway in this case as well. But again, the main thing is, if you try to just stay to policy 5 and the methodology we came up with, that will be challenged, yes, because there's a wider national policy statement of development that we need to give effect to and respond to various other things.
Oh, yeah, okay, this is very long. What I'm getting from that is that, no, Hawea doesn't, we don't have to intensify Hawea under policy 5, but it would be a good idea under policy 1 and the wider directives of.
So highway is a tier 3 urban environment, which is also subject to policy 5.
Yes, it is, but what I'm saying, what I'm trying to get at, and I'm not getting a clear answer, and I'm sorry this is going on, but what Barker and Associates did was they acknowledged that existing accessibility and existing relative demand were incredibly low, like less than Glenelg. That's clear. And then we suddenly get the zone change and the consent order through from Hawea, and we go, oh, we're going to have another look at it because we've got a zone change, but nothing's changed in reality and practice, just the zoning. But we're going, oh, okay, because of the zoning, we might get transport links and we might get this, and therefore we're going to intensify. What I'm saying is that policy 5 says we have to look only at existing or planned active and public transport. Yes, we can intensify how we're under other parts of the NPSUD, and maybe we should, but it did say in the original section 33 that the scope of the proposed variation is limited to areas which meet the requirements of policy 5. And I don't think Hawea does, because we've plugged into the model potential relative demand and potential accessibility. I can respond to that. So the potential is because there's a local shopping centre zone there that's not developed yet. It's not to do with potential public transport or future active transport links. They're not planned. They don't meet the definition of planned, so we haven't included them. So it's the accessibility to that local shopping centre zone that's now zoned, but it hasn't been developed yet. That's the difference.
I'll just, Ellie wants to say something.
I'll bow to seniority.
Look, I just want to comment on the public transport. I think we live in an environment where, in fact, if you use public transport availability and plan, we wouldn't have anything in Wanaka, because there is no public transport plan for Wanaka. There's a trial underway, but we also know in a practical sense that the only way that we're persuading ORC over years to increase public transport is to create demand for that public transport to occur. They are not forward planning their public transport. So I think, yes, you could read it in a very narrow way, that it's not part of a planned network out there, but actually we know that we've been lobbying and dialoguing with the ORC for some time about extending that. We know there's a trial underway. We also know that in a practical sense, until we actually start to create the pressure for those networks to be planned and delivered, they will never be planned and delivered. And I think one of the things we have to go right back to, in terms of the NPSUD, this was actually designed by a government to stop local communities and local councils forever finding a reason not to intensify. And if we say, actually, we'll never have a public transport system out here, so we'll never have to intensify, to me, that actually undermines what the NPSUD said. So I think that from my perspective, I go back to the point that I think Dave or EJ outlined. This is an area that is we're applying the same consistency of rules that we've applied to the balance of Hawea. It's unfortunate that it's come in at this very late stage through a different process. But what I think staff are recommending is not inconsistent with the directions either of the zoning that's now come here or the direction that the NPSUD is driving us towards.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Well, firstly, I wanted to touch on the spatial plan. I'll probably just point out that I think there's some inconsistencies in the statements in the report versus what the spatial plan does, because obviously the decisions around the appeal have actually overridden the direction of the spatial plan already, and that it can't be said that all of this area, admittedly part of it is, it can't be said that all of this area is in either an existing urban area under the spatial plan or a future area, and it's also not within a priority development area under the spatial plan. It doesn't make it any three of those. What it does say is that it could be considered in the future for investigation if public transport's available, and that clearly doesn't meet that test. So I just wanted to clarify that I think it could have been, its relationship to the spatial plan deserved to be better described in the report because it is relevant. Secondly, that and this is a question, is what gives you reason to believe that servicing, including water, wastewater and transport, are likely to be achievable to the extent required by this, the further extent required by this plan change. Because in reading the report and reading the memo from our infrastructure team, there is an incredible amount of uncertainty around servicing and particularly transport. There's an incredible amount of uncertainty around transport. And I don't think I have concerns that we can't accurately state that it is likely to be serviceable in that way.
Yeah, I suppose in relation to that, we've just gone through a process which has intensified significantly the Hawaii area. And it will be highly unlikely for me that there won't be servicing solutions to cater for the consent or the intensification of Hawaii that's going to occur. And this is adding to the entire area 15% more development capacity to the area.
15%, but yeah.
The overall area as it exists in terms of housing capacity of the area. So I think it would be highly unlikely.
Sorry, just on that point, that's not accurate. It's not 15%. It's something else. It's 6,000 to 7,000, which is, you know.
I just did the math.
Sorry?
It's 20.
And we've all got different numbers. Okay, it's 1,621 to 2,894, which is a 78.5% increase.
So this is on the basis of the increase we're talking about above what's already been agreed for Hawaii. So we're talking 1,200 units over 6,000.
That's roughly 20%.
Yeah, so thereabouts. So I would consider it highly unlikely that we're not going to be driving towards infrastructure solutions for the development of the Hawaii area. And this additional area I would consider is highly likely to be provided for an infrastructure through that process.
Okay. And I suppose further to that point, and this probably comes to the core of my concern, is that this is, any way we look at this is a substantive addition to an incredibly substantive addition to housing capacity in Lake Kawea. Now, in the case of, I'll take Ladies Mile, we have applied an incredible amount of rigour to spending a lot of money on master planning, undertaking infrastructure assessments, working with Waka Kotahi around transport for, to be fair, a similar number, not the same number, a similar number of additional houses in that corridor. And we spent something like $1.5 million over a period of 2 years, really nailing down. And we have $115 million allocated through Waka Kotahi NZ Up program. We have purchased a piece of land to provide for community infrastructure. The point is we've got an existing public transport network. We're a long way further down the road here. And as I understand it, we have, and I don't know how much money we've spent on undertaking this assessment, but as far as I can tell, we've had about 3 weeks to assess and understand the additional issues in this case. I think the report's the 19th of July or something from the council meeting. So you've had just over 3 weeks, I think, to get your demand assessments, your accessibility assessments, your infrastructure assessments, undertake consultation. Is that a reasonable degree of rigour for the intensification that's proposed?
Right. You go first. Chair, I can assist with responding to that one. So there are 2 key differences. This variation will be going through the Schedule 1 RMA consultation process, not the streamlined planning process. So the Ladies Mile, Taputahi Ladies Mile master plan change will be going through the streamlined planning process, which has a requirement for a lot of front-end consultation. So that's one key difference. Another key difference is that this land is zoned urban now, so it is part of the urban environment. Ladies Mile is not zoned urban. The plan change is to do it from a rural zoning. So we're already a step ahead in terms of
the consent order that's already come in, so it already engages with the NQCD because it's zoned urban, even though it doesn't look like that at the moment on the ground.
Just to add to that, which was great, thank you, Amy. Ladies Mile is quite different in the sense that we have got a number of different landowners on an area of land, and it was important that to achieve comprehensive development of that land, that council was able to step in and try and help to get some integrated outcomes. In the Hawea situation, we have one major landowner within that land, so you don't need that same degree of assistance in terms of making sure that you have instances where neighbouring landowners have roading connections that work, all of that sort of stuff that we're trying to achieve through the Ladies Mile master plan process. And that is still going through that streamlined planning process. I'm knee deep in looking at draft evidence at the moment now, and it is a pretty decent, it is a comprehensive process with those landowners, but the Hawea process that we went through for the negotiations of the consent order with those parties, including Otago Regional Council, was quite comprehensive as well. It's just you don't get the different layering up of different landowners' aspirations when you're only working with one landowner, and that's a key difference here.
So I've got one more.
Yeah, you go.
Okay, just my final question. I do appreciate this, and I do appreciate I might come to a different opinion of that, so that's okay. The final one is with, as you discussed, the relative demand and accessibility. We've applied a set of criteria and applied those, and that's been assessed by Barker and Associates and others around what constitutes accessibility for the purposes of the NPS. Now, and I think the NPS guides us to intensify in appropriate areas, and that's the criteria that we've applied to determine what is appropriate. Can you explain to me why we've taken a broad brush approach in applying the same intensification across the entire low density suburban residential area when they clearly have scored differently and certainly poorly in this case on accessibility and relative demand? And I take Nikki's point is that it's not just today's accessibility, it's also what happens at, once the local shopping centre is finished, it still scores poorly, at best low to moderate in around the shopping centre, and over 3/4 of the site still is either extremely low, whatever the extremely low or not even scored because of its poor accessibility score.
I can go on for a check. So with the low density zone, at the moment, and the numbers we've mapped doesn't show it, I'll explain it now. At the moment, you can subdivide up to 1 and 450 square meters per site. And if you have bigger sites, you can develop it at 1 and 300. So we've taken a practical approach given it's greenfield land, and we've mapped, and that's how we came to these numbers of we allowing for that 1,600 plan enabled capacity and 1,200 commercial around it. But a lot of that numbers, if the developer chooses to do land use and subdivision at the same time, he can achieve the half of those numbers already. We're streamlining the low density chapter and the subdivision chapter so that it aligns so that all the 1 and 300 is achieved across the board. At most of the district, the low density zone, you can already develop 1 and 300, but you need to get land use consent, and it's just hard. So a lot of the low density stuff we're doing is responding to the constraints in the existing rules that have been identified, saying, oh, these 5.5 meter heights keeps being triggered and cost people a lot of money to get consent every time, but they get it. And the density rules, how it's applied now, it's not consistent across your chapters. So they do achieve the 1 and 300 anyway, which we are proposing just to streamline that. So most of the Lake Harbour South land, that's low density, we're just proposing to apply the same changes that we are applying across the rest of the low density zone to more easily achieve that density. In this case, being greenfield land, it would be more efficient to front foot it now, making sure the developer actually put services in the ground to service that density so that we don't have to come back later when infill development happens and have to retrofit it and upgrade it. So that's for the bulk of the site. The rest of the capacity, we've got probably about half of that number for 1,200 is mostly in the medium density zone. And again, that goes back to us reviewing our medium density zone, realizing 7 meter height, which is the same as the low density, is actually not a medium density zone. So that is responding to that and getting guidance from the government's prescribed medium density zones, what they actually say, to be recognizing that with the local shopping center next to it in the future, that would be a very accessible area, and it would make sense to allow for that. Attach housing topologies like flats and things there, so that it can support public transport and load shift.
So, I mean, there is a greater argument for accessibility around the local shopping centre, but it still performs poorly, and the entire Apawea performs poorly on accessibility, particularly on a transport perspective, a public transport perspective, and we continue to do so, and the report reinforces that. But I mean, I go back to the purpose of the NPS, and that, you know, our purpose really is to intensify in appropriate areas, and that there was some criteria set for that, and I do have some trouble that we are defying our own criteria in applying densification at a broad scale. So thank you.
Ellie, just you want to respond?
Very concise. Just need to look a bit more strategically. And when we started this project and worked with the councillors, we weren't just focusing, or we made a change from focusing just on policy 5, but to looking at our existing urban zone. Are they actually working? What monitoring can we do to see if they're actually enabling people to look at a couple of sections of land and go, yes, I will remove those houses and I will get some density there. We found some barriers to that. And part of the context of what we've been doing through this urban intensification variation, as opposed to a policy 5 variation, is to do what we can with the monitoring since we've had the proposed district plan to say, hey, what can we do to get our existing urban areas being utilised as much as possible, because brownfield development is just as important as greenfield development in the context of what we need to do within our district to get better housing choice and better housing affordability. So I think we need to remember in the round that this is also what we're trying to achieve.
Well, thank you for trying to explain everything. I think one of the issues from a non-planner's perspective is that there's an awful lot of information over a very short time. And frankly, it's just incredibly hard to process the right approach. My perspective from listening to everything is that, I don't know, I feel like we trip ourselves up by the fact that we've got what's now an existing urban area, but the word existing is the problem because it exists on paper, it doesn't exist in the physical world. And so from a non-planner's perspective, and from, I guess, a lot of community members' perspective, it just feels like it's kind of intensification on steroids. And so, you know, the cart is before the horse, like we've done this and now I've got to do this, and then we've just got to keep going. So for me, there's a lot of reticence around it, but I think my question really is, given that it's come at us quite, it feels a little rushed. It probably doesn't to you guys, but on the listening end, it feels a little rushed. You know, if we were hypothetically to postpone the notification, we recognise there's a risk from central government, as you put in the paper. To me, it would be prudent of us to absolutely understand what the current issues are and potential for future issues in more depth before signing off on this. So my question is like, if we postpone the notification, can you give me 2 scenarios of the level of risk? So the best case scenario from central government and the worst case scenario.
Sorry, can we just be very clear? I don't think we're postponing, at best we're postponing the addition of this area. We wouldn't be postponing the notification. That's already been approved by council.
Sorry, I should say notification of the variation. To be clear.
So this is being wrapped up into the variation. We would still be proceeding with the variation that council has already signed off, because we are well beyond the statutory timeline. We are on notice from the government, and the government has also signalled that if we don't act they will actively consider making us a tier 1 authority.
Okay, that's not clear to me, what that means in terms of.
That
as a
means,
whole
that
district.
means another layer of intensification.
We have already agreed to act to a substantive extent though, so it's hard to, the government would criticise for that.
Yeah, we'll go to law.
I haven't got a question, but I'd like to speak to the resolution in support of it. I do that now.
Yeah. We're in the discussion.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking from a practical sense, not such a planner sense, and I'm sorry some of these points may not be in totally logical order. I know the area pretty well, been living there for 25 years. I do believe it's what we're doing is appropriate, and you've got to take it, just got to remember, this is a timing thing. If this consent had been issued a few weeks earlier, we wouldn't even be having this discussion right now. It would already be in the variation, it would be out there. And on that point, it is going out in a variation public consultation that goes through, and it will go to a hearing committee. I suggest if it doesn't go, if we don't sign off on it to help with this process, it's going to happen either during the hearing or it'll happen a couple of years down track, because what you're going to have is a landowner or a developer sitting there with a certain bunch of rules across the road. Another area is going to have a different set of rules allowing higher densification of commercial and things like that. And so they are going to come back at us, and we're going to be in a position where they are wanting to do infill, which we've got in some areas. It is a greenfield site, so it's much easier to do this now. Infill development is difficult. Across the road in Hawea, what's the likelihood of that infilling to medium density on some of those sections that are family-owned plots, things? So you're not going to get it all. I come back to the point you raised. Someone raised the point about the low density areas, so that's changing. But infilling low density is not going to happen like we're going to get in our greenfield site. Hawea South structure plan, which shows a high level of long-term master planning. They've got a structure plan, and they've got long-term master planning. It was approved through a lot of consultation and mediation with the community.
It wasn't approved.
They have got one in place, okay. And that enables even more locals the opportunity to do this. Will lay a greater commercial area. It'll enable, the whole push is to enable locals to live, work and play locally rather than travelling into Wanaka. And with the greater density or ability to do more commercial, that'll even enhance that. Let's talk about the Albert Town Bridge not coping. Nothing will happen on that Albert Town Bridge until you get a greater traffic count. The only way to get a 2-lane bridge there is to approve this high intensification out of Hawea, so you get more people driving in. And in 30 years' time or 20 years' time, we're going to have a lot of buses coming in from Hawea or light rail or whatever, public transport. You've got to keep that in mind. This only enables things to happen. It doesn't bypass the process of having to go through a consent process to get subdivision, and the subdivision consent won't be approved unless there's a capacity to service it. So we're not actually signing off on having all the water in place right now. I'll just remind you, we just signed off on a joint housing full plan, which is a government shared plan. Three of the solutions there, 3, 5 and 8. One of the highest ones, incentivising a developer to get on and do something. If we don't go with this now, we're being so hypocritical and inconsistent with that resolution that we passed to support that plan before. If we don't support this, we're not supporting what we signed off on earlier. It's not all going to happen overnight. I was a commissioner on North Lake. And at the time, people say, you can't approve it. All the cars are all going to drive into Wanaka. You've got to sort out the roads into Wanaka first. We didn't. We left that. We said that'll happen down track as this evolves. We put the structure, the service capacity in place. And yes, we're now about to put a roundabout in an intersection, which is getting busier. That's so many years after North Lake went ahead. If we hadn't approved that, if we didn't have North Lake on the table now as a greenfield site, you would have had a mismatch, a terrible development out there. And this is what's going to happen out of Hawea if we don't go with this. I'd say it's better do it now and know what we know the scope of the change, know what we're in for. rather than having it later on, push the process on us or doing the infill. Infill development is not good. And it's not actually happening to the level we want. You've got to remember commercial done by investors. I suggest that this doesn't go through. Investors know they're doing commercial, they've got the choice of doing 8 meters or rather they can wait and do 12 meters in a couple of years' time, they'll wait. I don't think you'll get the buy-in on the commercial side out there right now unless we show them that there's an opportunity to do more commercial, make it more viable and provide a better service to the community. I think they'll back off. And I know for a fact, they're talking about medical centres out there, they're talking about cafes, they're talking about gymnasiums, all that sort of thing. And that's just right now. I tend to think if the developer knows or a investor knows that maybe down 2 years they can invest and make more money, they might wait till then. The residential, 300 metres versus 450, it's going to be cheaper. And these are the only sections in our district I would suggest that are under $300,000. And I know we talk about the affordability thing, but hey, they've sold 300 sections out there already. 100 already built on, another 100 in design. So some people, that community is getting really big. So when we're talking about consulting with the community, let's hope we're talking to those 300 households or those 300 buyers, their input, because they're part of the community now. Well, yeah, the commercial side, the developer incentivise. The developer out there just finished, I think he's just finished coding, it's in a playground. I don't know what his commitment was, what his requirement was to do a playground. I understand he spent about $1.5 million on it. I think he had an obligation to spend about 400,000 or 500,000. They're talking about joining up the green spaces. I think that developer, I think I saw something the other day, he was talking about as a community project, putting an underpass under the road to connect up this area with the domain. I suggest maybe some of those things will dry up. As a response to what was it? I think I've covered it all. Yeah, I'm just very glad, Quentin, we haven't spent 1.5 million out there and we're going to get a good outcome. Compared with ladies' mile. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I've made my point. I support it.
Thanks, Al. Okay.
Thank you. It's been a restless night, as you can imagine. I care very deeply about what happens with this, and so I've talked to a lot of people and thought about it a lot. My experience with this, obviously, before I got into doing community work, the HCA was vehemently against anything happening south of Cemetery Road, and as everyone knows, in court trying to defend the urban growth boundary, and that got broken. Set precedent for the other area of land that the developer had for the greater scheme, and so there's a strategy to work with the developer to create the best outcome. I don't think I need to speak light of how big that is for the community to completely turn around and all of a sudden start collaborating with a developer that they were in court with only months prior. And I think it's a very rare example of the community being so actively involved in the collaboration of doing stuff, and how we're at its current state is set to triple the amount of people that are there. So I don't think that speaks anything towards not being welcoming of new people. I think my concern with this is that it undermines the process of what the community have gone through with the developer, because a lot of that was on the precedent of what the previous laws or previous rules were set upon. This kind of somewhat carelessly throws another 70 or 80% on top of what the community have accepted. That's relative from the 1621 that was enabled from Highway South to the 2894, which will be enabled at Highway South through the densification. I think it doesn't feel like it's sat with the community very long, and it feels like it's being rushed, and that there is a lot to say about the social license, about how we create the best outcome, because it feels like we're making a decision based on now this has triggered something that we need to double it, rather than looking at the best outcomes and making sure that the community involved from here on out on the decisions. I think we will always talk about affordability when it comes to density. In the 5 years I've been in Hawea, the land value has more than quadrupled per square metre. It's hard to argue that creating smaller and smaller sections is doing exactly what we want it to do. I think the Joint Housing Action Plan will be great to help us inform on more accurate data on if that's actually the case. I don't feel like we're in a strong enough position to be making this decision at this time. To go ahead, and I think, just to finish, that it doesn't speak kindly to the amount of volunteer effort and work that's already been done by the community to get to this point. Thanks.
Comments, questions? Just one question. We was mentioning the numbers again. So paper in front of us, it's 61,000 that's been enabled by the court consent order. 6,100, sorry, yeah. Larry, 7,300. That's correct. That, to my maths, that's just under 20%.
Of the total relative.
Yeah,
population.
about the difference between this area now and this area in the future, as opposed to how it is.
Yeah, because again, if we ignore the community sentiment, this development wouldn't exist without the community. We know that none of the provisions allowed for it, we were prepared to defend it. It wasn't until the community came on board to find a way forward that this even exists in the first place. So I don't think we can tar it with the same brush as everything else and think that, you know, this hasn't come up from, you know, with respect to you guys in planning as slightly unexpected and underpeered. And so, yeah, I think it's just reasonable to be cautious.
Can I just comment on the numbers for the gym? So for Lake Highway South area, this identification plan change would add plan enabled capacity of 1,600 and commercial feasible capacity of 1,200. About half of that is already enabled through the land use planning way of intensifying. So you can, so we were trying to show that it's a greenfield area.
Yeah.
You can develop 400 sections, or the developer can go ahead now and develop 600 sections and sell them as 2-unit capable. And then half of that number we're talking about can already be achieved. So the bulk is actually about half of that 1,600, which is enabled in the medium density zone through things like flats. You can build higher. So it isn't actually like it's nowhere near 70 or 80%.
Yes,
it's about a couple of hundred, 600-700 max probably.
I think that's,
yes.
I think we're more percent. Well, that's the hardest argument. That's the hardest thing. Is I think a lot of the community are feeling like, well, what is the difference between, you know, what we have now and what is going to be in the future? And it's not clear, because I mean, I read that document 5 times and I was like trying to be very diligent, but again, like late nights and get a lot of stress. But I think as well, it's just been very clear about how we communicate it. Yeah, I think it's, like I say, it's a difficult thing and it feels like it's coming in as a rush, and it doesn't make me feel like I'm in a good position to make a strong decision on whether or not this is really important.
And finally, got Barry.
Thanks. Just a question. The assumptions seem to be that this area will meet the requirements for intensification, and the discussion seems to assume that. It's a statutory process we have to go through. Is it likely that this area would not meet the conditions to undertake intensification?
Can I respond to it? So it's very likely that if we go through this plan change without including Lake Highway South, that the landowner or any submitters would look at our monitoring report that has identified that open zones is not achieving the objective the Burlington zone is trying to achieve. And the bulk of these changes proposed is trying to get our loan zones aligned to achieve what the actual purpose of the zone is. So it's very unlikely that we go through this process and these changes doesn't apply to like at the end of the process when they submit and say, hey, why is the rest of the low density zone now streamlined and enabling 8 meters when your monitoring report shows that your zone is not operating the way it should? Same for the medium density. So especially when you look at the directive of the MPCD that talks about enabling those attached housing pathologies, it's horizontally attached housing, but also flats, that you need to enable that for basically to be a well-functioning urban environment. So it's very unlikely that at the end of this process, like our South is not included in having similar provisions, whatever that may land on, but it's very, yeah, that's my opinion.
Just a clarification question.
Yeah.
Thanks. So just talking about the provisions and them not working, there was another area, and I can't remember which, within the report.
Hang on, let's see clarification.
Yeah, it is getting there. That said, because we haven't had time to understand how the provisions work in this area, we're not including it. So you're just sort of speaking to the provisions not working, but I just wonder, we've not given those rules, and we don't understand how they're going to play out and how they're going to work, and whether they are going to work for how we or not, in terms of monitoring. There's been nothing to monitor. Yeah, Joe, that's a point that it's not. I just,
So
we're just saying, participating.
the zone framework, which is the rules for the low density chapter, we've monitored how it's performed across the district
Elsewhere.
But it's not, but the highway will be subject to exactly the same rules, which has been identified as not working.
I guess that was the point I would like to make, that it would be very hard for any planner to argue that there would be a resource management issue, which is imperative in a section 32 assessment, that you would have a lower density suburban zone in the rest of the district and a different one within this area of hardware in terms of how they can develop. It's not special in terms of the sort of urban environment that it will be created in the future.
Lisa, Matt? Still speak. Okay, any good? Right, yeah. No, okay. So we've got before us a recommendation 1, 2, and 3. Do I have a mover?
But I just have clarification, which option would I be? Because the options in the report, in the section 32 report, are different to the options in the council report. And there's a different number of options. So if we're to reject the addition and to retain the status quo, which option would I choose on the council report? Which is which option in the planning report?
So the planning report that through the chair, the planning in section 32 does consider different options on how to intensify, and it has a recommended intensification recommendation. The agenda report say either option 1, I think option 1 is accept that intensification will also apply to highway, and option 2, I think, is to not.
It's to reject it.
Yes.
So where we are today.
Yes, it's critical, it's the notification.
It's the notification, yeah, to include it with the rest of it.
So if you were not happy, you would not be.
Okay, so you would support option 2, or you would change what motion would I be?
No, because we're just going.
Well,
No, because additional changes would need to be put in because of
It's just
hang on, hang on.
What would then be, if we took it to the nth, we would then be having 2 lower density suburban zones within our proposed district plan, 2 medium density zones, the ones that don't have the intensification that you approved in June, and the ones that do. So the don't would be the hardware, the do would be the rest of the district. Yeah, sorry.
For us,
Really hard to
I think the import of not,
Yeah.
so we have an approved plan
Yes.
change for introducing the MPS UD5 rules across the balance of the zones.
Yep.
If you didn't approve this one being added to that, we would, because of the consent order, run the existing current zoning for this block alone.
Yeah.
So medium density, low density, and we would continue to promulgate and notify for submission the changes to the balance of the low density and medium density zones that council has approved a number of months ago.
Yeah, 1st of June. Yeah.
Well, on your report.
Sorry, can I just have one question?
You look confused, Mel.
I am,
Yes,
but I think I'm almost there.
Mhm.
So if we approve it, do any of the locals have a say? Is it still going? They still need to have this.
We're only approving to notification.
Yes.
It's not, we're not
Through the chair,
approving.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, this is a decision to notify the proposal to include this area within the intensification.
We're not approving.
Then there's a
this
process
today.
for
No, there's a process for submissions, and then after that, there would be a hearing in relation to
Okay.
that.
But to be fair, that puts the community in a very difficult situation because they have to find the money and the resources in order to
It's no different than any other community.
prove that the notified version, what we notified matters, really matters, because it puts the onus on somebody to prove that that's not the case. Otherwise, the fallback position is the notified version. My preference in this case, even though I accept that the developer might make a submission, is that we put the onus on them to demonstrate it is the case rather than the other way around. That puts the community in a much stronger position, and it puts us and it puts the onus on the developer to demonstrate it is the case.
And that's totally at odds with everywhere, all our other communities. So we're doing it for all the other communities. We're going to make a special case for this one.
Can I just clarify something? So Mike, what you've just said, essentially that would be option 2, right? Option 2, not approve the inclusion of Lake Highway Southland in blah, blah, blah. Which would mean that the balance of everything continues, but this isn't included.
That's correct.
So
But it is included, but based on the existing zoning.
Yeah.
Just-
So that's important because it's important in process, isn't it, that we don't just go to the motion of option 1. Because, well, then we'd have to follow up to see, because we need to, do we not need to ensure the balance?
That would remain.
No, it just remains the same.
So-
It's an either or.
I would seek to move option 2 as the.
But we've got.
I've moved it.
He's moved.
I've moved the
point to it.
It hasn't been
He
seconded.
hasn't got a seconder, but he has.
Very sure.
I didn't hear that anyway.
Oh,
Sorry, I think there was the beginning of a motion before someone asked the question, so I think councillor Cox did signal that, so we should test whether there was a seconder for that.
Very.
And then we've got Barry seconding it. And before I put it to vote, because I haven't said anything, because I've been listening to you all. We have a housing issue in this district. And I agree with councillor Cox that we must start planning for and improving the availability and setting up frameworks for different typologies of houses. We currently build the wrong type of houses in this district, and this enables a swing to correct that imbalance. And it's not going to happen overnight. It'll be over 10, 20, 30 years. But then again, when you look at what's happened at Lower Shotover, that demand is there. And that demand will continue. And I think CE said this publicly, and I would certainly agree with the sentiment. We cannot satisfy demand in Queenstown, but we can certainly provide the framework, the types of people and the types of people that actually drive the engine of this district to actually come here and have the option of living here and putting roots down. So that's my piece for supporting this motion. I see we've got Quentin and Nikki, and then I'll open up to anyone else who hasn't spoken before.
Okay, and I'm just speaking in response to the motion as a right response that while I agree with you that we need housing, we need the right sort of housing, we have provided to the biggest degree that we ever have in history and currently, and that the uplift in zone enabled capacity at hardware over the last 5 years is extraordinary. And it is unprecedented. And I think we need to let the dust settle and just see where that takes us. I don't think anyone understands the numbers that we are talking out there around the plan enabled development. We've already got 240 square metre sections. We've got infill that can occur. We've got Sentinel Park that's provided different options. We have all the different, we've provided density around the shopping centre. We're providing everything that we are asked, and then some again. So I'm not opposed to development. I'm not opposed to the right sort of development. I'm just saying we need to take stock and understand what this means for our communities.
Go.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I just want to, I'm for intensification, absolutely, in the right places and done in the right way. And to me, in the right way means where we can. So where central government doesn't tell us we have to do something. So where we can, we talk to our communities about it. I think that's really important. We sometimes, you know, forget we're local government and we have a significance and engagement policy and we have principles of local government and the purpose of local government. You know, we're supposed to make decisions democratically where we can. And so that's why I asked the question at the start, do we have to do this under policy 5? And the answer that I've taken from what I've gotten back is, no, we don't have to do this under policy 5, but it would be a good idea for other reasons. And I guess for me, I don't think this isn't worth investigating, but I don't want to lump it in with the other variation, which covers areas that do fit the policy 5 criteria. I think we can take our time here to do it better, make sure we do it well, and make sure the community comes along with us. And I think that's really important and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So that's what I'm basing my decision on. Thanks.
That's last. Okay, last.
Yeah, look, I'm kind of on the same vein. I think I'm sorry that earlier I used the wrong language because I talked about postponing notification. What I meant was postponing the inclusion. And to me, it's like, what's the worst case scenario? That was the question that I should have asked, is what's the worst case scenario of not including the inclusion? I just think exactly what you said, we need to let the dust settle. We need to, I agree, I'm all for intensification in the right places, but this is a greenfield site. It's a suburb that is not accessible and it just doesn't make sense. And the community has only just grappled with the growth that it's, you know, enabled alongside the developer. So I don't think the worst case scenario of postponing it is actually that bad. I think we can take the time that we need.
Any further commentary? Barry and Lyle got last try to reply. So once Lyle speaks, that's it. Put it to the vote.
Who's got the last one?
Yep. Well,
Oh, yeah, just so I hear what you're all saying, that you're all living right now in the now rather than looking to this is not going to happen the next couple of days. This is going to happen over 30, 40 years. I've seen the development in Wanaka and there's areas that were signed off years ago that are still evolving. And I can assure you, relying on infill development to sort out the housing is not going to work. This is a greenfield site. It is accessible. It'll even be more accessible in the future. That's one thing that you can be certain about. And nothing will be approved for a building until the services are provided. You've got, at the moment, you've got a willing developer willing to commit to do a good job out there. And we haven't got many of those over in Wanaka at the moment, willing to do residential. But looking to the big picture, I just urge you to look at the big picture. Why put impediments in place? And I'm sick, you know, get back to the joint housing action plan. Central government, they've committed what, $25 million to this project. And then they see something like this council sitting here and saying, okay, there's an opportunity to make it even better and even more affordable housing and greater housing stock in the future. And this council is now saying no. They're going to be thinking, hang on, why are we supporting? Why is central government getting so behind this council? So I'll leave it with you. I think it's a long-term thing. Yes, you can talk about community consultation, but I say let's go and talk to the 300 people who have bought out in that area and see what they think, whether they would rather have a larger, higher commercial area or a smaller commercial area, whether they'd like to have an underpass through to the hardware domain, or whether or not they're the ones you want to talk to, not the ones that have been living here 50 years sitting over in the nice house looking out of Lake Hardware. I'll leave it with you. That's what I am. I totally support it. And I'm a member of the Wanaka community.
thank you, Lyle. So I've got a mover and a seconder. We've got the recommendation before you, 1, 2, and 3. All those in favour? Sorry, hands up. Aye. There we go. 6 against. 5. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Just want to
you.
commend staff. There's been a lot of work put into this, so thanks very much for the staff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. On item 7, road realignment, page 305, 303, loving the time. Over to you, Tony. Oh. When did it go?
Across to Good afternoon, your worship, councillors. The paper in front of us is in regards to road realignment, Hunter Road and Speargrass Flat. The intention of this is to stop a legal road indicated on the attachment B in yellow and realign that to the alignment indicated in blue. This is not equitable. The land that being gained is more than we're giving up, and so there would be a compensation paid for that to council. The proposal is that we would go away and value that with your approval to get the value for that. I'd like to point out that Deputy Mayor Smith has identified an error. The easement proposed is for right-of-way pedestrian. It should be right-of-way pedestrian and cycling. We've confirmed that with the consultant that was the intent. So we could today make an amendment and to correct that, or we could leave it on the table and come back to you with a corrected one. Other than that, I'd take this as read and pass it back to you. Yeah.
Questions, councillors? One quick question.
It's all the land on both sides owned by the same landowner.
Yes, all the this is solely on the on one landowner's.
I'm sorry, I just trying to understand, so the blue bit becomes the road? The full.
Yes, that is,
Yeah, correct. And that'll be available for cyclists and walkers, right? It won't be a full road, obviously. At the
So
end.
the proposal, it was only picked up very late, but a recommendation for books for registration right away brackets pedestrian. So we checked with the consultant, the Trails Trust were involved in the discussion around this. So I'm not sure why that wasn't pedestrian and cycling, obviously. That would still be less than a full right of way, so I'm not sure what the difference between that might be. But
So the body, so they can take off the current road, so they can actually do some work on that land. And that's what they.
so I think noted in the report that they've got a separate subdivision application, which is going through. Trying to make clear that granting of this won't be a determinant on that subdivision. We've got some other headwind in terms of the district plan to enabling that. But on discussion, was felt that this was good to achieve even if the subdivision didn't occur. And my understanding is that the Trails Trust are involved in some of that discussion, but the Trails Trust don't have any particular proposal right now in front of them, but it is securing a potential route for the future, is what I understand.
Just a point of clarification, if I may. Is it, and I can't recall, is it precinct or is it amenity zone under the?
I'm not sure, but I think what they're proposing isn't contemplated by.
In either way, it's quite a difficult threshold for them.
Yes.
Because they're either close to the road or they're actually exceeding their minimum lot sizes.
Yeah, my understanding is made it very clear that if council grants this, that doesn't in any way predetermine the system of the application, it will still be out of the district plan resolutions.
Can I just, your worship, be very clear that the areas that get corrected to pedestrian and cycling are the two green strips. They are just the easements because the balance remains a road. So what we're doing is we're shifting the yellow road to become the blue road. And in addition, the council has agreed to easements, being the two green ends of that road, to become easements for pedestrian and cycling.
Correct.
Easement A and B on the plan.
But they don't exclude in any way the ability to access over the road.
That's not right.
Yeah.
If you think in general terms, the yellow swaps to become blue. The red is really only where they're contiguous already. And then there are two additional easements which are agreed, which are the two green lines, which aren't the road, but are actually captured as part of this deal to create a permanent easement for pedestrian cycling. So what you can imagine ultimately is the trail that's being constructed will be the two green ends plus the blue bit in the middle. The balance of the blue bits are just to retain connectivity to the existing roads. Oh, we should talk to the registered surveyor.
No, historic survey.
Mine's probably a comment observation on the piece of land rather than a question, but pony clubbers of the area will be very grateful to the Hunts for their recreational access to their land through the equestrian community. And when I look at that blue road, that actually is the recreational area that comes in use on this property, and at many cross-country hacks with ponies running through that bush up the back. But I can see the vision of creating a real engaged public amenity and widening that to pedestrians and cyclists outside of just our equestrian base. So to me, it actually adds a lot of amenity value with that road swap. So yeah, know the piece of land and think that that little line looks way better than where it is currently.
I agree. Well, good. So, yeah,
Sorry, just a query on the width. I'm just thinking of it as because you've got the ends are obviously for riding or whatever and recreation only. I'm just thinking ahead, we're obviously thinking ahead about how things intensify and densify and how many people might be using that road in the future. I just wonder if any thought's been given to that in whether the width that it's obviously shrinking 10 metres, whether that's good for accessibility for horses and cyclists and those people thinking ahead.
The easement width?
Well, yeah, because you're
Okay.
limiting the road width, which then limits the,
Still 20 metres.
it's still 20 metres, but I'm just wondering, I just wondered if you have been given to that.
Talking about the blue, I think the road.
The blue, yeah, the blue's shrunken, but if you're going to have mixed use on that piece of road and then over time that land may intensify, if it became busier, you know, are we going to miss that road not being 30 metres wide? That's all.
Excuse me, I'm not aware that we're proposing to put that in as a road. It's an informal legal road. It
Yeah.
provides future access as opposed to putting the road in. I don't know though what the subdivision proposal is that they're pursuing, which is subject to a separate process and they may or may not get. In terms of width, I can't comment. I don't know what basis the width was decided on or degree. I'm sure it's been through the process. But as far as I know, we're not proposing to put a road through there as such a physical road.
Okay, so it's just a gravel.
It's not.
Sorry, the blue.
So imagine that this is an
It's
existing,
just an easement for walking.
this is an existing unformed legal road. The swap out between the yellow and the blue is just so we do that to create the road. It connects to either end of Speargrass Flat and whatever the other Hunter Road. But actually the practical intent is to create a cycling and pedestrian easement, which is the green bits at either end and the blue bit in the middle.
And so we'll never want to use.
So it
that
won't
as a
be,
road.
no, that's right.
Okay. that's
And
fine.
and in fact, if we ever had the thought of actually increasing the size of that, we'd have to pay compensation for the additional width anyway.
Gotcha.
But 20 metres is a local standard, reasonably standard local road.
No, it was just, I mean, it was just a random question that popped into my head at the moment. Thanks.
I'm happy to move it.
Thank you, Esther. Do I have a second? Thank you, Matt. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? None. Motion carried. So it was with the change the resolution. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, retrospectively go. Hang on. No, I'll make this clear.
Well, we're not putting it
Move
on
it.
the table.
Hang on.
So we'll
Esther, are you happy?
make the amendment of adding cyclists.
So on 4,
Yeah.
it's got pedestrian and cycling.
Yeah.
We're all.
Do we need to add a question? Like, does that need to be added or not? Or is that not part?
No, that's on A. I don't think so.
Right scenario where horses were not permitted, judging by
hang
the
on.
history and stuff.
We're voting, so
Sorry.
I'm not clear what negotiable discussions have been with the landowner around that. We picked up through Councillor Smith and we sort of picked that up around the limitation around pedestrians. I'm unable to
state whether there's been a further discussion about other. Yeah.
Thank you. Item 7, on its way, not moving.
Can I just a clarification before we start item 7, I did raise a point earlier and I'm conscious that I partly understand that we can't include the value in the resolution because of commercially sensitive reasons. So I'm just wanted to flag that I appreciate we did not, I don't want to disclose the valuation. But I am interested in how we control the delegation to that value, the agreed value.
I've had councillor Glading approach me as well, and I've got some potential wording to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item 7.
Item 8.
8. 8.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to have words of token. Thank you. Page 316 or 314.
There was just welcoming Tara to the table.
Hello.
The author of the report.
So can I just to caveat, so that I think just before perhaps even the council starts discussing, to tidy up, I think what councillor Smith has just raised, which councillor Glading raised earlier, it would, you could address that by making instead of a noting resolution, it can be a resolve, and you'd amend it to read resolve that council will only sell Commerce Development Block at or above the price point contained in the attached valuation report.
Resolve or agree or what's the?
Well, agreed. Okay, sorry, I was drifting back to
That's right.
but yeah. So I think that just simply without, it basically puts a floor under that that's quite deliberate.
Thank you.
Just,
Hang on, no, sorry, officers, you got any further?
We, yeah, other than what's the chief executive has just outlined in other comments, would like to take a brief.
Okay, questions, councillors?
just one, and it was just another concern around limiting the delegation. So at point 5, we've got delegate final terms and conditions with the sale approach and so on. I won't read the whole thing out, but just wondering if there's some wording we can put in there to ensure that those terms and conditions don't require anything of the council in terms of works or expenditure. And I look, I'm just anticipating, you know, it's a difficult site. Maybe the terms and conditions require us to remove the trees or something, I don't know, but I'm just concerned about delegating the final terms without putting any limits on that.
Through you, your worship, yes, I tried to look at that because obviously even in a normal market sale, there will often be conditions that are attached. You know, there needs to be some flexibility because there will always be some of these things that come on. Though I understand your concern that if suddenly we were confronted with a bespoke sale and purchase arrangement that sort of somehow tied us up into a long-term arrangement. I have drafted comfortable, possible. I don't know that it will actually achieve what you're looking for, councillor, but so I've got, and I'm happy to give this to James Agree, that a further resolution that any proposed offer, so any proposed purchase offer that seeks financial arrangements other than a normal market sale and purchase be referred back to council for consideration and decision.
It's fine by me. Sounds good.
So provided we end up with a normal standard market offer, Quinton, yep, there may be some little bits around the edges, but if suddenly they're saying, well, you know, build us a road, but build us a road, or we want to, you know, do a joint development over 15 years with you of this, that would have to come back to council. I think that's what you're trying to.
That is exactly what I'm doing. Yes, thank you.
But that doesn't restrict, I don't know how quickly or any time constraints on trying to negotiate under that. Would that impact on that if we had to come back to account? We get a special meeting, I suppose.
Well, I think you've granted the delegation to the government steering group until 30th of June 2025. So
okay.
I think that could give us, we'll know well before that whether we've got a deal or not.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just wanted to confirm, and I think it's good that this paper's in public, rather we could easily run this in public excluded because of commercially sensitivity, but I think it's good that it's in public. Can we just, I just wanted to clarify that in order to allay any fears that we are selling off the family jewels, that the purpose of the commonage, or I suppose if you could just outline the purpose of the commonage and why this is achieving that purpose.
Yeah, happily do that. The commonage was received by council specifically for the purpose of addressing the unfair costs associated with the tourism industry and other activities in this district. So in the paper, there's some words to that effect. It was intended from the outset to be for sale, so that the council had revenue coming in. Council has over the years disposed of portions of that. This is the final portion. So that is the intended purpose. The land has always been in our control for that purpose. That's the council's fulfilling the intended purpose today.
And the potential for a, let's just say, significant sum of money to offset our debt borrowings and stuff is obviously advantageous at this time and achieves that purpose.
That's correct, and our current annual plan or LTP anticipates the sale of this land specifically to help reduce our debt loading.
Yep. Right.
It'll all be in the press release.
When we sell it.
I mean, that's a good point in that this doesn't guarantee that we will sell it. We've tried before to sell it and we haven't quite got where we needed to. So, we hope that we sell it. We hope that we get the money that we want for it. And it will help us with our debt. Yeah.
So the public nature of this report is our opening marketing shop. Advise people that it's up for sale again. For a price.
Right. Thank you, Karen. Okay, councillors, the resolutions 1 through 8 plus the additional 9. Do I have a mover?
Oh, and the amendment.
8 is amended, yes, and then 9. Barry, second, Quinton, all those in favour? Aye. Any against? None. Motion carried.
Thank you, Gary. Good, selling not good, what do you think?
Now back onto the correct number 9, item 9, CE report, page 326 or 324.
Yeah, so thank you, Your Worship. Look, it's a very simple report. It's really there's nothing apart from just noting the committee meetings that occurred in the last round, so the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, and the items that were considered there, and also the Wanaka Upper Clutha Community Board, and the 2 items that are there. There's no other matters to be addressed by through this report this month.
Any questions? I'll move that we note the contents of the report. Seconded by Councillor Cox. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion carried. Right. I move that we move into public excluded. Thank you, Barry. All those in favour?